Today I'm going to be walking through the Fujifilm X-E5 settings. I'm going to walk you guys through all the different settings that I personally use for my street photography. If you guys aren't street photographers though, don't worry. All the settings are going to be perfectly usable for pretty much any type of photography that you are doing. I'm also going to walk through each and every setting on this camera, so if you do want to interchange different settings for another setting, you absolutely can. It won't be a problem. You'll have a full understanding of this entire camera by the time we are finished with this video. So without further ado, let's dive right in. All right, guys, here's the X-E5. It's an incredible camera. You guys can see right here on the front, I have the TT Artisan 27mm lens. I love this lens for my daily carry if I'm just walking around and I want it to be super light and portable. I can adjust the aperture here with this ring. It'll go from A to 2.8, A being automatic, or I can control it with the scroll wheel, and I can also change it with the dial right here, so completely manual. Also have my glow mist filter on the front, 1/4 strength. Always have that thing attached to every single one of my lenses. On the front here, we have a few dials and buttons. So we have the scroll wheel right here. This is going to allow us to change our settings, whether it is set to aperture or ISO or even shutter speed. You can completely customize that scroll wheel to put it at whatever you want. We also have this little toggle switch right here. It can be pushed left or right, and then it can also be held down and held down the other way. All four of those options will do different things based on what you set it to. You can also press the button right there if you want, so completely customizable however you want. When it comes to the top of this camera, we have lots and lots of little dials and switches here. So right here we have our film simulation dial. Up at the top, you can see which film simulation you are on. So you can scroll through, pick whatever one you want. We also have our shutter speed, completely manual right here. You can scroll through this. You can also set it to custom options here, which will allow automatic or you to be able to select the shutter speed with the scroll wheels. We have the exposure compensation right here. This will change your exposure compensation, obviously. Then we have this little button right here. Again, another customizable button, your shutter button, which can be half pressed or full pressed. Half pressed to focus, full press to actually take the photo. On the back here, we have multiple wheels and buttons. So up in the top left, we have another scroll wheel that can be used and customized however you would like. We have the drive delete button. This is going to be able to be set so that you can either delete your photos or use it to switch between drive modes. Drive modes being single shot, burst mode, whatever you want to decide, that button will open that menu. The next one we have is play. This will open up and show your photos and videos in the gallery. We also have the AEL and AFL button. This is the auto focus lock and auto exposure lock button. I personally set it to auto focus lock. So that way when I have focus on a subject or area, I can just click it and it will lock out the focus. Some people will put it onto auto exposure lock. Some people have it set as a back button focus. You can kind of put it whatever you want, but I personally like it to just be a toggle into manual focus and out of manual focus basically. The back scroll wheel right here, again, is fully customizable. We can choose to put it as a button to select through different modes, or we can scroll on it to select, different aperture, different shutter speed, different ISO, whatever you want to set this scroll wheel to, you can customize it to whatever you want. The Q button right here, this will bring up the quick menu, so you can select through the multiple options. There, they are fully customizable. You can choose whatever you want to be in that quick menu. Over here we have the joystick. It can be used to navigate through the menus as well as your photos, as well as be pressed to select things. Menu button, this right here will pull up the menu. Display back button, this will go back or change your display options on your screen. Over here we have this little dial right here. This is going to control the viewfinder to make your viewfinder more or less in focus. So you can just scroll it back and forth as your eye is up to the viewfinder to decide where it is supposed to be so that you can essentially see the subject in focus. Over here, we have a panel that can open up. This will have your audio jack, your USB-C, and your HDMI. You can also use this incredible little doodad that they add in with the camera right here. This will plug into your USB-C and will give you a headphone jack. That way you can listen to the audio as you're shooting. This comes with the camera, which was actually a cool little addition that they added. Over here, you have single, continuous, and manual. When it comes to your focus mode, I keep it in continuous, so you can put it whatever you want there. As well as on the bottom, we have the Bluetooth button and the battery/SD card tray. So you can push that in and out, or you can open the battery, line up the orange dot with the battery holder, and that will be good to go. All right, that covers all of the outside of the camera buttons. Let's dive into the menu system. So if we open this up, you guys can see up here at the top, we have the settings for your image quality. We have image quality here, autofocus, manual focus settings, shooting settings, flash settings, movie settings, the regular setup settings, the network settings, and your personal My Menu settings. So up at the top, when it comes to the image quality, there are multiple options that we can set here. We have image size. We will want to set that to large 3:2. The image quality, we will want to set it to fine plus raw. Essentially what this is going to do is give you the highest quality JPEG along with the raw file. You could also set it to raw if you do not want to have the JPEG, or you could set it to just the JPEG if you don't want the raw. I personally like to have the raw just in case. You never know what is going to happen or when you might need the raw photo to use it for something specifically. The raw recording, we are going to put lossless compressed, especially with the 40 megapixel sensor. It is going to be extremely large file sizes if you do uncompressed. So make sure you are doing lossless compressed. This will give you a phenomenal photo to work with. It will not lose quality, but it will be slightly more difficult for your computer to handle. So make sure that you have a quality computer if you are going to use this file size. If not, use the uncompressed, but just realize you're gonna have to buy more hard drives. So it might be worth investing in a better computer instead of spending all that money on hard drives. Selecting the JPEG and HEIF. JPEG is the one we're going to want to go to. Again, we're shooting with RAW, so HEIF is the higher quality format, but since we are shooting RAW, we don't need a higher quality image here. We can use the JPEG for convenience, and we can use the RAW photo if we need it. Next one we'll go into is the film dial simulation settings. These can all be customized. They can be set to whatever film simulation that you want, but also they can be set as a recipe. So you could turn on the recipe and it would essentially do the exact same thing as the recipes that you can set and customize in your camera already. So I will walk through those later, but those are three options you have there. And then Acros right here. I prefer the red. It's a little more contrasty. I don't really use the standard, the YE or the G either. I normally keep it on the R. So, but that's my personal preference when it comes to that. The grain effect, this is going to control your grain. I am normally going to be using strong and small, but depending on my recipe, if I want it to be a little more vintage, I might go with the strong large. If I want it to be a little sharper, I might turn it on to weak or even turn it off. I might turn it off specifically when I'm shooting at night. You know, if I'm cranking the ISO and there's noise, I don't want to add more grain and noise together. I want to be able to denoise that image before I add the grain after. So normally though, strong and small. Color chrome effect, I normally have this turned off or weak. Sometimes though, strong. This is essentially going to set the vibrance, the saturation of most of the colors in the image. So you can turn that on if you want a little more vibrance in your photo. Color chrome effect blue, I 99% of the time like leaving this off or on weak. I very rarely nowadays turn it to strong. Essentially, it saturates the sky And when it does that, it sort of drops the brightness of the sky. So the sky gets like darkened and extremely saturated, and I don't really like the look of it. So, most of my recipes, most of my stuff are going to have that turned off. But every once in a while, if I want a specific look, I will turn it on, just normally not. Smooth skin effect, if I'm shooting a portrait and I want to be able to do quick turnarounds, I will turn this on, but for the most part, I leave it off. White balance, you can have it set to whatever white balance you want, but as well, you can go in and customize it even further with the white balance shift. So usually I'm shifting it into the warm. Depending on the recipe, I will shift it somewhere into this bottom quadrant over here. Every once in a while, I switch it, and put it on different ones, but for the most part, it's going to be in that bottom right-hand quadrant, and the white balance will be whatever I want to set it to. So the dynamic range, this part is very interesting. Something I just kind of learned, actually, was that the 100 is mainly going to be used if you are shooting raw photos, while the 400 is going to be used if you are mainly shooting JPEG. So the reason why I didn't really know this is because I got these cameras, these Fujifilm cameras, to mainly shoot in JPEG and not have to have the RAWs. So when I was shooting them, I realized that in order to get the most dynamic range out of my JPEGs, I needed to use the DR400. But if you're actually wanting the absolute most dynamic range for your photo, you will want to use the DR100 and shoot RAW. This is going to allow you to shoot at the lowest base ISO, which is going to be a lot lower and have higher dynamic range for editing. But if you shoot at DR400, you will shoot at another ISO. You'll shoot at 640. And this will give you more dynamic range in the JPEGs, but you won't be able to shoot at the lower base ISO, therefore you will lose dynamic range in the RAWs. So up to you how you want to shoot. I almost always keep it at DR400 unless I want a little punchier of an image. Dynamic range priority, I leave this off majority of the time unless it is a very, very dynamic scene with lots and lots of deep dark shadows and lots of bright highlights such as a sunset, in which case I might turn it on, but for the most part I will leave that off and adjust things in the tone curve. The tone curve is where you can essentially create contrast or remove contrast from your photos. If you drop the highlights down to -2, that will essentially drop the highlights down, make them darker, and if you then as well raise the shadows by dropping it to -2 as well, you'll essentially remove the contrast from the photo, making it look like there is more dynamic range. Now, if you want the opposite effect, you can raise the shadows to +2, and you can raise the highlights to +2, and that will create a very contrasty image. It will do the opposite. It will add more contrast, darken the shadows, and brighten the highlights. I like to use this when I want to shoot a pocket of light, and I just want that pocket of light to be illuminated. And if I want to be able to see everything, I'm going to do the opposite, where I'm going to drop this all the way down so that I can see both the highlights and the shadows at the same time. Color. This is usually going to be at +4, but there's some cool hacks you can do with this when you're using the recipes. One hack is if you create more and more contrast, what will happen is you will also add some saturation to the image. So what you can do to balance for that is you can drop the color down if you add a lot of contrast, and it will keep your colors from being oversaturated and having that fake look. Sharpness, I either keep this at 0 or -4. Just depending on if I am looking for it to be, way less sharp, more filmic, or if I just want it to be kind of a nice normal photo. High ISO noise reduction, I keep this at -4. Long exposure noise reduction, I always turn this off. Lens modulation optimizer, I keep this on. Color space, we are going to leave that as standard RGB. If we were to put it at Adobe RGB, the problem with Adobe RGB is that most of you guys do not have a computer screen that can even see Adobe RGB. So therefore, you are not even going to be able to see the colors that are being shot in this photo. It does technically have more colors. It is technically a higher quality image, but most of us do not have a computer that can see that, and also the phones and the places where you're publishing that on Instagram and stuff also cannot read Adobe RGB. Therefore, you will want to keep it on standard RGB. Pixel mapping, this is just something you'll do every once in a while to keep your camera nice and sharp. The custom settings here, this is where you can put in your custom recipes. So you can go in, you can name them whatever you want, and then add them into your settings so that, like, essentially whenever you want to change the recipe being the colors that your camera is outputting, you can come into here, you can select whatever one you want, and it will automatically change all of the settings to what is stored in here. So typically I will have at least 4, but I'm going to add definitely 3 more down here as I get some more time. But I put my personal favorites in here. I've also dropped the recipes in the link inside of the description of this video. So if you guys want to check out my recipes, support me so that I can make more of these videos, go grab them. It would mean the world to me, but you don't have to, obviously. You can go find plenty of recipes on Fuji X Weekly or any of those other sites. The edit and save custom settings, this is where you will go add the settings in. Auto update custom settings. So I've seen other people say that they like to have this disabled. I am of the opposite opinion. Essentially what this does is when you change settings in your camera, this will automatically update those settings into the recipe and then save them so that the next time you go to that recipe, these settings will be the same. Well, since we're not going to be going into here and changing these really once we've set them, what we are going to be changing is the shutter speed, ISO, aperture, and what this is going to do is it's going to save those settings. So that means if I turn off my camera and turn it back on, it is going to still have the same aperture, ISO, and shutter speed that I had before I turned it off. This is extremely helpful if you guys are walking around doing street photography all day and you don't want to drain your battery. You can turn your camera off, and then when you turn it back on, the settings will be the same and you can just continue taking photos. So for me personally, for practical use, I like to use it like this. Just keep in mind, if you do change any of these settings up here, they will save automatically and you will have to go change them back if you want them to be what you had them before. All right, autofocus and manual focus. This is the focus area. This is where you can essentially change from single point to zone to tracking. I personally use single point 99.9% of the time, so I recommend you guys do as well. I've really honestly never used the zone. Every once in a while I'll use tracking if I need to track something, but again, 90% of the time I'm using single point. I will use a tiny single point if I really want to be accurate on what I'm going to focus on, or I will increase the size if I just want to focus on a somewhat inside of an area. This will essentially just grab whatever is near that point and it will focus on that item. Especially when you are using face tracking and stuff, it will focus on faces in that area. If you're not using face tracking, it will focus on whatever is on that point. The autofocus custom mode, we're going to leave that at all. This just lets you scroll between the single point, zone, wide tracking. If you have this set to single point, you won't be able to access the zone or wide tracking while scrolling through like we were just doing. Zone mode customs is where you can set your custom zones. I don't use those, so I won't set them. Autofocus single, autofocus continuous. This will allow you to choose what is going to be in each of these settings. So, you can kind of choose what you want. If when you are shooting autofocus single, you only want single point, you can do that, or whatever. I leave them all checked, not a big deal. Autofocus continuous custom settings, I just leave this at the 1. It works plenty fine, but if you guys find that things are getting wonky when you're trying to autofocus, you can come in here and change the sensitivity, the tracking, the speed of tracking, the speed of switching. All of these things can be changed in there. Store autofocus mode by orientation. I do not have that on. I don't care to switch the autofocus mode, whether I'm in portrait or landscape. Autofocus point display. I don't want to see the autofocus points on the screen, so I leave that off. Wrap focus point. This is disabled, so that way when I'm scrolling to the left or right on the screen to select where the focus point is, it won't wrap around to the other side if I go off the edge of the screen. Number of focus points, we're going to leave this at 117. You can increase it if you want, but 117 is plenty. Pre-autofocus, this is just meaning that it's going to constantly autofocus even when you're not half pressing the shutter. I leave this off as I do not want that to be running and focusing while I am not trying to focus. Autofocus illuminator, this is just a light that's going to help the autofocus at night. I leave it off and you can turn it on if you need it. Face and eye detection. I leave this on eye auto. You guys can choose what you want, but I like it to detect the faces, especially when I'm doing street photography. I want it to lock on to the subject when it sees it. That's just my personal preference. Subject detection setting, I have this set to animal, and I have another custom button that will switch to essentially animal detection if I want to switch to it. Autofocus, manual focus, I leave this off. Manual focus assist, I leave it to focus peaking red. Essentially what that's going to do is if I switch to manual focus, it will light up the area in the camera that is in focus and it will light it up red so I can see clearly what is in focus and what is not in focus. Interlock, manual focus assist, and focus ring, leave it off. Focus check on, this essentially has it set to where if I use the manual focus ring, it will allow the camera to zoom in onto whatever the subject is or whatever I'm pointing at. That way I can lock the focus with the manual focus ring and then it will zoom out when I go to take a photo. Interlock, spot, auto exposure, and focus area. Leave this off. This is essentially going to do the auto exposure to the focus area. We don't want that. Instant autofocus settings, autofocus single. Depth of field scale, this is going to be pixel basis. Release and focus priority, this is essentially saying that I want the camera to prioritize the photo being in focus versus releasing the shutter. So this will keep the camera from taking a photo if the photo is not in focus, meaning that the autofocus was not able to lock onto the focus point. Touchscreen mode, this is going to be set to autofocus. I personally like to be able to tap on my screen where I want the camera to focus. It's very helpful if you are going fast in street photography and something's about to pass you by and you need to switch where the autofocus point is. Instead of having to move it with the joystick, you can just tap on the screen and quickly take a photo. Pre-shots, we're going to leave this off. Self-timer, we're going to leave this off. Save self-timer settings, we're going to leave that off. Self-timer lamp, we'll leave that on in case we want to use the self-timer. But mostly we're going to use interval timer shooting. This just takes continuous photos for as long as you want it to. Therefore, if you had a family photo you wanted to take, you would turn on the interval timer shooting and let it run continuously until you guys feel like you got enough photos. Interval timer shooting, exposure, smoothing, we're going to turn that on. These are all the bracket settings, film simulation settings, focus bracket settings. You guys can dive more into that if you want to get into some more professional shooting, but for the most part, I'm going to leave those alone because I do not use them. All right, right here we have the photometry section. This is going to be set to multi. Essentially what that is going to do is going to measure the entire scene and adjust the exposure based on the entire scene. Versus center weighted, spot, or average. This is going to give the most accurate exposure if you are using any of the auto settings such as auto shutter speed, auto aperture, or auto ISO. So keep that in mind. You want it to be set to multi. Shutter type, this is going to be set to either mechanical shutter or electronic shutter. Personally, I have a button that switches between these because if you have the camera set to mechanical shutter the entire time, your shutter will eventually die. That is what happens with these cameras over time. Your shutter will not last forever. So the more you can use the electronic shutter instead of the mechanical shutter, the longer your camera will survive, as well as the healthier the shutter count will be, which will make it easier for you to resell it. So I have a button that switches between those. You'll want to use the mechanical shutter when you are inside. That is going to help with the flicker of the lights, so you can use the mechanical shutter there and the electronical shutter when you are outside. There's a couple other reasons for the mechanical shutter, but I won't dive into them too deeply. Basically, you just need to know that it's mainly going to help a lot with the flicker of lights. So if you have any lights that are flickering in your scene, you can switch your mechanical shutter and it will help a bit. Same with the flicker reduction. That's going to also help when it comes to the flicker, so you can turn that on if you have lights flickering in your photo. The image stabilization mode, I keep it on continuous. The ISO, I'm going to set that to 640 for my DR400. Digital teleconverter, this is the button I have set to here. We'll be walking through that later. Flash, this is very easy to use. If you have a flash, you just connect it to the top. It'll automatically set it to TTL, and then you can just snap away and grab photos with the flash. Movie settings, not going to cover these in this tutorial due to the fact that we're not shooting movies that often with this camera. Honestly, I use my phone if I'm going to shoot video, or I use my Sony, but I mostly use this camera for photos, so I don't really dive into the movie settings too deeply, so we'll skip that. These are where all the settings are. So we have the user settings. This is where you can format your card. Very important. If you want to format it, just make sure you have it backed up before you format it. You do not want to lose all your photos. The other thing that we are going to be looking at, not any of these beepings. I have all of these turned off to not annoy everybody around you as you're taking photos. But the screen settings, so the view mode settings, I am personally going to have it set to the eye sensor and LCD image display. This is going to allow it to automatically turn off the screen when I go to shoot using the viewfinder. And then I have it set to the LCD for the playback. I don't really use the viewfinder to play back images, so I'm mainly going to use the LCD. EVF brightness, I keep this at +5. I want everything to be as bright as possible. The EVF color, though, I do not change this, and I do not make any color adjustments that would make this camera look completely wrong, and you would end up screwing up your colors, so you do not want that at all. LCD brightness, I will also turn this up to 5, but right now I have it set to 0 because I am recording the screen. I don't want it to be too bright and blow out the highlight on the screen. LCD color, again, not changing that. LCD color adjustment, do not change any of those. Please double check, make sure you have not changed those. You do not want them to be changed. Image display, I do not want the image to be displayed after I take it on the screen, so I leave that off. Auto rotate displays, I personally like it to rotate the display, so I'm going to leave that on. The preview, exposure, white balance in manual mode, set that to that. Natural live view, turn that off. That's essentially going to show you the raw image instead of the JPEG. The JPEG has the recipe. It's the whole point of using recipes, so why would we turn that on? F-Log, view assist, that's for video. Electronic level setting, I have a button that will turn this on. Essentially, it will put a little level on the screen that will allow you to take photos and see if your photo is level. So I will turn that on if I need it, but I have a custom button for that. Framing guideline, this is rule of thirds. I set it to the grid 9. Auto rotate playback, I leave this off. That way if I take a vertical photo, I can view it vertically on the screen. And if I take it horizontally, I can view it horizontally on the screen. If you do the auto rotate, it will rotate the photo and you will barely be able to see anything on the screen. It is not an enjoyable experience. Focus scale units, but at feet doesn't really matter. Aperture units doesn't matter. None of these really matter. Large indicators, you can change those if you want to make your indicators larger. Again, not super important. I like to have my screen set to either high contrast or the dark ambient lighting. I think this is really cool. I saw this on another guy's YouTube video, so sorry for stealing this idea, but I really like the look of this. I am definitely going to be playing with it, but for this video, I'm going to leave it on high contrast. Location info, leave it off. Menu background transparent and menu background transparent. Button dial settings, focus lever settings, nothing. Edit quick menu, I set it to 8. I used to set it to 16, but I realized that there's just too many settings on that screen that I don't use them all. So I've lowered it down to 8 so that I have fewer options, so I know more of what is actually in my custom menu and I can actually use it more efficiently. So I have it set to face eye detection setting. So I can switch between having it auto detect faces and not. I have it set to smooth skin effect, so if I'm shooting a portrait, I can turn that on. Color chrome effect blue, again, I really don't like this, but if I felt like I needed more saturated blues, I would turn this on. Highlight tone and shadow tone, I do use these pretty often, especially if I'm in a scene where I want the recipe, but I don't want it to be as contrasty as it was. So I'll change those every once in a while. Grain effect, I'll turn it off if I'm at night. And color chrome effect, the regular one, is going to affect the vibrance in the photo, so I have the option to grab that if I want as well. Function menu setting. These are my custom settings that I like to use. Number one is going to be the face detection on and off. I like to set that to this button right here up on the top so that I can turn this off and on quickly. View mode. I like to use this for when I want to change the view mode for my camera. So let's say that I wanted to turn off the eye sensor that turns the EVF on. I could click this and it would get rid of the eye sensor and only be the LCD. So I can kind of toggle in between those modes to set what I want and use it how I like. But I have that button set to the front of my camera. So that's the view mode. The pushing it once to the right is going to be the level. Holding it to the right is going to be switching it to the subject detect, which is going to be the animal autofocus, so I can take a photo of a bird if I want. Pushing it the other way once will be the digital teleconverter. Essentially, it will zoom in on the photo. Tap it once, it'll zoom in once. Tap it twice, it'll zoom in even further. Tap it again, it will go back to normal. Shutter, this is going to switch my mechanical and electronic shutter on and off, so I can have that if I long press it to the left. Auto exposure lock and autofocus lock button. Again, I like to set the autofocus lock on this button, so I can lock my focus. I have it set to toggle, and I will show you guys how to do that later. This rear dial, I press this in order to access my custom modes. This is what I like to set it to, so I press it. It'll pull up the custom modes. You guys can see it. Let's see, let's go back. If I press it right here, all my custom modes pop up and I can scroll through them at my own leisure. The Q button, yeah, this Q button is just going to be the Q button. It's going to do exactly what it's supposed to do, which is open the quick menu. All right, let's go back. Power zoom lens function, not going to touch that. Command dial settings, this is the front. I want it to be my aperture and my ISO, so I can toggle in between these. I can tap the front of the camera and it'll switch between the aperture and the ISO. I also have the back one set to the aperture, so normally I'll have the front one set to ISO, the back one set to the aperture, and I will use this top wheel right here for the shutter speed. Command dial direction, this just can reverse the direction that the command dials work, so if you want it to be the opposite, where left is up, right is down, you can do that. Shutter autofocus, single, leave that on, leave the other one on. Shutter auto exposure, leave both of those on. Shoot without the lens, leave this on. That way if you have a lens that is not compatible with the camera, it can still shoot. Shoot without card, you don't want to take photos with the card not in the camera, so turn that off so it does not take photos if there's no card in the camera. Lens zoom and focus settings, not going to really worry about those. Auto exposure, autofocus lock mode, you're going to set that to on-off switch. What that essentially does is it allows me to press the button once and it's going to lock the autofocus, press it again, and it's going to unlock the autofocus. If I had it on when pressing, I would have to hold down the button and let go when I want it to stop. Auto white balance lock mode, same thing, on when pressing. Aperture ring settings, leave that to command. Function button settings, leave that there. Touchscreen settings, again, touchscreen is on. I don't have the double tap, no touch functions. Touch zoom on, touch screen settings on, EVF off. Lock, you don't need to lock your camera, but you can lock it here if you want. Power management, auto power off, 5 minutes. Performance to boost, EVF and LCD boost settings, prioritize resolution. Auto power off, set that to high. You will be fine. Your camera is not going to get damaged by setting that to high. It will just keep it from shutting off way early due to it being too hot. Save data setup, no need to do that. Bluetooth settings, obviously we can go in here if we want, but not really important. Bluetooth smartphone settings, you can pair it with your smartphone. Airplane mode, This can be useful. It can save battery. So if you turn on airplane mode, if you need battery to be saved as long as possible, turn on the airplane mode, it will save a bunch of battery. Other than that, nothing really important here. My menu settings, I have this set to the shutter type, face detection, flicker reduction, grain, white balance, tone curve, and interval timer shooting. So I can set those in my menu. All right, guys, so that's pretty much all of the settings, the walkthrough. I'll kind of show you guys how these toggle switches work now. So if we take and use the toggle switch with the one right here, this is going to be what zooms in the camera. So let's see if we can zoom into my house. But yeah, you guys can see, zoom in once, zoom in twice, and it'll zoom back out. If I hold it, it'll switch between the mechanical shutter and the electronic shutter. It'll pull up this menu right here. If I pull it to the right, it'll toggle between the levels. If I hold it to the right, you guys will see I've switched to subject detection animal. That way, if I see a bird, I can take a photo of the bird. Then I can turn it back off when I'm done. Face detection, I can turn it off and on. Push this button for the eye sensor or LCD only. Autofocus lock, you guys can see down here, it says autofocus lock. When I turn it off and on, I just press the button, it'll lock the focus. Really helpful if you like that setting. I do personally. This button is going to give me my custom modes. So I can click on it, scroll through the custom modes, whatever I want. We have the quick menu. This is where I can sort through all of those quick menu options that I had. I have walked through all the different settings and the different features, functionalities. If you guys are interested in getting some incredible recipes for this camera, I do have some available. I'm gonna put the link in the description of this video. I'll put it right here. As well, if you guys wanna get this lens that I use, I'll put the affiliate link right there. You guys can support me. It would really mean a lot, and it would help me continue to be able to make content like this for you guys.